Hello, it is October the 13th, 2024. I just completed the Penguin Classics, The Mayflower Papers, and the subscript or subtitle is Selected Writings of Colonial New England. So when you first get the book, you may be thinking, okay, it's one continuous book written by one person or whatever, but it's not. It's several writings from original settlers, and it's arranged in a real logical way because a lot of it goes year by year. And the reason that I got this primarily is because my family on both sides, my wife's and myself, were original settlers in New England. My group landed around 1640 in Jamestown, Virginia, and my wife's group was in Stamford, Connecticut, was their area. And I'm not sure exactly what year, but similar time frame. So a lot of early American history is real important to my group for genealogy reasons as well. Um, so a lot of this at the beginning is about the actual voyage that occurred before they landed in Plymouth, and then they started going year by year. So 1620, 1621. So for my particular family, they were 21, 20 years, 19 years, something like that, earlier than my group arrived. But a lot of the conflicts and things were still going on well past the time that my group arrived. And this book is really eye opening because it's written by several people and the stories vary greatly. So you've got the ship story and settling and trying to survive. And then you've got um, a lot of involvement with the Indians and Squanto, the guy that really was beloved by the settlers. And when he died, they were mourning over him. And part of popular culture now is to blame everything that happened over there on the white settlers. Everything that happened was their fault. And unless you look into some of this information in here, you really don't know. There's a lot of stuff in here that you don't hear in traditional oral statements by people and online and things of that sort, because it's really easy to blame one group rather than kind of assess blame to everyone that's involved. And the old statement is like there's two sides to the truth, yours, mine, and then the truth is somewhere in the middle. And some of the stories that these settlers put down in this book are horrifying. I mean, the things that some of the Native Americans did to some of those settlers at the very beginning, such as flaying people alive and taking the innards out of people and burning them in front of them while they're still alive, things of that nature. And if you look up on Google, which I just did, were the Native Americans of New England considered savages, which a lot of this book says that they were. It is it's written in a real negative way, the answer. It basically says that the settlers perceived them as savages because they didn't have a written language, they didn't have a religion, and that is also mentioned in this book. But the answer on Google does not say anything about the fact that they attacked the settlers and murdered them in mass and extreme violent ways. There was one story in here that is particularly heartbreaking from Mary Rowlandson, The Sovereignty and Goodness of God, which is the next to last segment in this book, where there was 30 some people living in a house and the natives attacked the house and killed almost everybody inside by shooting bullets into the roof. They were on the roof shooting through the walls. And then they lit the place on fire, and they couldn't come out because if they come out, they'd get murdered by hatchet and axe as they're trying to get out of the house. And some stayed in and died in the fire. And some were killed and knocked in the head after they got out. And then they kidnapped some. And the women were basically property of the Native American men. And they passed them on from one to another if they got disinterested in them or whatever you want to call it. And this all precedes, this story happened before Philip's War. So Philip's War was the first mass conflict between the settlers and Indian tribes over there. So if you just want to believe that settlers arrived and then we just wiped them all out for no reason because we're the bad guys, that isn't true. They cohabitated together for quite a long time. It was, let's see what this Philip's War started. Well, you can look that up because I'm not sure I can find it in a timely manner here. It's on page 212, Philip's War started. Let's see if I can find it real quick. Yeah, okay, it started in Philip's War began in the year of 1675. So if they landed over there in 1620-ish, the first official war didn't happen for 50 some years. And in all of that span leading up to that point, a lot of stuff happened. And it wasn't just the English picking on Indians. It says in one segment of this that the men were so afraid to go outside of their cabins to take a piss because if they went outside, they'd be ambushed and murdered. This was happening in a lot of the different regions that the settlers were in. It wasn't just like Jamestown or Plymouth, one town. All of these different regions were sprinkled throughout the Northeast, and a lot of things happened to a lot of people in different regions because they're surrounded by nomadic groups. And that was another thing about, you think of people owning land and someone coming in and try and take the land. In most of these situations, the natives didn't live in one place and stay there. They didn't have like a town settled up or whatever. They went from place to place. They moved around and basically just lived wherever they wanted to, like gypsies. So it wasn't as if settlers arrived and picked a spot and was taking it from them where they already were. It was, they find a spot and try to make it grow or whatever. This one guy that was joined the fight at the Philip's War segment, he was basically a farmer out by himself, just trying to farm and live on his farm. And he's got these groups around him that he's basically feeling are about to ambush him. He's hearing rumors that he's going to get ambushed at his farm. And he basically says, I don't have any choice anymore but to join the military because they're going to murder me and take my farm. And all he wanted to do was live in peace. He said he wasn't even qualified to be in a military, but he had no choice because he was going to be murdered out there just for trying to survive. So you can argue that, well, should the English have ever sent any colonists over to America in the first place? But I would suggest they probably didn't even know if there was any people there at all. So they get there and they try to make a life, and they're getting attacked sporadically, and they're trying to live and get along, and in a lot of cases make friends with these Indians, and some of them are favorable and some of them are not. There's different groups of people. So it isn't that simple. It's not like you can just say white bad, Indians were good. Because a lot of what they're saying is true. The natives didn't have a written language. It was difficult to communicate with them. It was dangerous to communicate with them. Sending an envoy of any type to talk to a group of them to try to make peace or whatever was very dangerous, and they might not even live through that situation. They might get murdered over there, and then the other ones are waiting back at their settlement going, well, what's the word? It's like, the word is the guy we sent died. So it was very dangerous, very complicated, and primarily the only writings that you're going to get, not only, but for the most part, the best writings are in this Mayflower papers. There are other writings from settlers and things that exist, but there aren't next to any writings from the natives because they didn't have written language. Now, a lot of their information went word from mouth down the line and then later got recorded by somebody, but it was well past the time frame of the actual events, whereas these are dated at the actual time frame of the events. So you can read these from the people that went through them, and all I got to say is, if you want to think that the settlers are 100% the bad guy, you haven't read Mary Rowlandson's The Sovereignty and Goodness of God. She was kidnapped and taken all over the place, from place to place, told regularly that if you don't do everything we say, we're going to smash you in the head and kill you. And she feared every day, was in trauma. She wanted her husband to be allowed to buy her back so that she could be back with her husband. Her sister had lost children and basically said, just murder me because I'd rather be with my family. And they did. They murdered her. And it doesn't paint a good picture of the natives that were in that area when they settled. So you can say what you want to about the wars that happened 50 years down the road, but it seems to me, after reading this book, that attempts were made to try to live with settlers in peace, and it was very difficult. And I'm sure the settlers did a lot of things that were wrong and retaliatory, but they weren't 100% wrong. Nobody is generally 100% wrong. If you want to believe in those types of situations, that's generally called propaganda. So the Americans, when they got here, they weren't even intending to be their own country at that point. They were just settlers in the name of England. And from what this book says, they didn't even realize that they were like their own independent nation until after the Phillips War, when they kind of were forced into it, it seemed like, and basically won. And just like in any fist fight, the person that walks up and starts the fight, nobody ever sees it. And then the one that finishes it and beats the other person up typically is the one that gets in trouble. And that's what's kind of happened with this in popular opinion, it seems. But unless you've read these accounts, you don't really know. You can say a lot of things, you can believe a lot of things, but until you've read, especially even the military account at the end, but especially Mary Rowlandson's The Sovereignty and Goodness of God. The one thing that I respect a lot from these people is that no matter how hard their situation got, they still prayed for God's assistance. And they asked for help from him all the time. And like it or not, they got help. And they survived, at least some of them. And a nation was formed from their endurance. And America has done very well going forward after all of that situation. So, yeah, it's a lot more complicated than people want to make out, I think.